Hey, I'm Jennifer Moore with Marcelino Moore, and I just sat down with my law partner, Clay Campbell, who is a business lawyer, and we talked all about the intersection of business law and family law and what business owners who are going through a divorce should think about. I hope you enjoyed the video. We practice very different areas, but also not different areas of law. They tend to intersect or have similar rules and games and strategy. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And one of those things is how businesses become involved in a family law case and how our work intersects there.
Yeah. We've had several clients overlap because of those things, that either the family issue creates a business issue, or the alternative.
Exactly. And so the way it happens in my cases, divorce cases, is oftentimes there is a business that was started during the marriage, or even prior to marriage, but then continuing, one of the spouses continued to work during the marriage in the business and grow it. And then it is a marital asset.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to value that marital asset and value that business.
Yeah. And then where I see it is, what impact does it have on the business? What happens if it gets split up amongst the owners? What if there are other owners who are getting dragged into this family law fight? Like, what are the partners going to have to deal with? And so, yeah, there's all sorts of issues for us to deal with.
Yes. And so on my end, what I'm primarily thinking about, like I mentioned, is what is the value of that asset, and then how am I dividing it? And to value a business in a family law case, I generally hire a forensic accountant, somebody who can do a deep dive, because unfortunately, a lot of the businesses that I deal with the books aren't pretty.
Very few people keep great records.
Yes, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like, what are y'all doing?
Right.
Where is your QuickBooks?
Right.
Instead, it's like written on
an envelope and some crayons or something. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you have to hire a forensic accountant. And sometimes that's hard for my clients, because that is not a cheap endeavor.
Not at all, especially because they're going back and recreating sometimes years worth of information, because there's not a record of it.
Yes.
So they're looking at bank statements, they're looking at tax returns, they're looking at utility bills, or whatever they can to piece all that together. And that's a lot of it requires a lot of effort.
Yes, a lot of time. It's exactly what you said, piecing together, creating a P&L, like a profit and loss statement, where there wasn't one because the business owner never created one, or creating a balance sheet, the same idea, doing the work that the business owner didn't do but should have.
Yeah.
So that can get really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I have had usually a couple a year, and that I always warn my clients ahead of time that this is an expensive proposition, but generally we're taking that step when we know it's going to be worth it in the end.
Right. You're not going to do that for a business that's barely covering the salaries. I mean,
Exactly.
like if it has no assets, if there's no long-term prospects of it, then you're not going to put that into it.
Correct.
And same from the business perspective. If it's not worth it, why fight over something that's only going to make the lawyers and the accountants money?
That's right. Yes.
And I tell clients that all the time. Like,
I
look,
do too.
I'll happily cash your check, but you don't need to spend this money.
Yeah.
Like, you're fighting over nothing at the end of the day. So.
Exactly. I'm very cautious to tell my clients, do not spend more on me in an equitable distribution case than you're going to get out of this.
Absolutely.
Do not throw good money after bad, and hate me at the end. That's not my goal.
Exactly.
Yeah. So then in my cases, when I'm valuing that, and then I have to decide, how is this value going to play into the division of the marital estate? Typically, we're dividing the estate equally. Sometimes that can swing one way or the other, within 10% or so. That's a high number, but typically that's what we look at. And then, like you said, what happens when if it's divided?
And so some of that's going to depend on what the operating agreement says.
Mm-hmm.
Like, some people never draft an operating agreement. Some companies, if they just, a couple of buddies got together and created a company and went with it, and they just never did an operating agreement.
And used their crayons to keep their books.
Exactly.
Yes.
But if there's an operating agreement, sometimes we will put provisions in there if we know that the parties are married and they're going to, they want to go ahead and control for that, so that there are no issues down the road. Because what may have been two partners if you get involved, now there are 3, and the
Right.
50-50 becomes 50-25-25.
Right.
And then that creates a whole different set of management issues. What type of obligations does the greater owner have to the lesser owners? And so depends on who I'm working with in that scenario. Sometimes the non-divorcing partners, like, I don't want to, I didn't sign up for this. This
Yeah.
is, I only, so buy your soon to be ex out.
Yes.
I want only you to be involved. I didn't want you to be able to give some of your interest to your soon to be ex that then now I have to deal with both of y'all.
Right.
But I know in your world, that's not always possible because that requires cash, which is not always something that's available for people to do. And,
Yeah.
and maybe they can't come up with a number that makes sense for them, and also
Yeah.
factors that play in.
Exactly. If I get $1 million value on a 25% or 50% of a business, and the other 50% is somebody else's, well, that $1 million value, most of the time, that's the largest asset.
Yeah.
Maybe the house
Mhm.
can kind of equalize that, and that's how we get around that. But then also, a lot of people don't want to be house poor, for lack of a better
Right.
word, you know? And so where you're mentioning the idea of the business owning spouse, or the spouse that worked the business and primarily handled that, wants to keep the business.
Mhm.
But does the other spouse want to keep the house and then have nothing else, or very little?
Right.
Sometimes not. And then, of course, we run into the issues of not wanting to sell the home because there may be children in the home. And
Mhm.
so it becomes that issue of how are we paying out if it is going to be a payout, and we can't equalize the estate or
Yeah.
otherwise offset the value of the business in another way.
Yeah. Yeah. And, so then we come up with creative solutions. We're going to pay you over time. We're going to secure it with maybe a life insurance policy,
Right.
or we're going to use I don't know, some other enforcement mechanism that we can come up with to make everybody feel okay with whatever that deal is. And because generally it's in everybody's interest for that business to keep going.
Yes.
Right. Like
Absolutely.
the non-business spouse, the business spouse, and then if there's a partner, everybody wants that business to keep going. So
Right.
that's normally what we're angling for, is how do we make that happen? Because that's one of the biggest sources of income that the family had before. They're going to need it after.
Correct.
Even divorce, that's what they still need. So,
Yep. Absolutely.
you know,
So we are creative. There have been cases, I don't do it often, but there are cases where the spouses continue to own the business together, like you mentioned,
Mhm.
and then that does require a rework of the operating agreement.
Yes, absolutely. Because now you went from 1 or 2 people being the owners to 2 or 3 or however many. And so what does that do from a voting perspective, and what protections can you put in place there? What happens if a year down the road, this is not working? How do we get out of it? So we try and envision what might come down the
Yes.
road, but it doesn't always work.
Right. A big part of our job is thinking about all of the potential terrible things that could happen and trying to plan for not letting those happen.
Right.
It doesn't always work. We don't have crystal balls
Yeah.
as much as I would like to think we do.
I've told most of my clients, nobody ever comes to me before the problems happen. It's always after the problems, because a lot of things we could avoid. In a marriage, you could have a prenup.
Yes.
It may not handle everything, but it's going to give you at least the rules for how you're going to deal with stuff. Same thing with an operating agreement. If you come to me with saying, hey, here's the operating agreement we want, here's what we want to do from a voting perspective, here's how we want to, in the event of somebody's death or somebody's divorce or whatever, we want these things to happen to prevent it from interfering with the business. We can design all that.
Yep.
But next to nobody, no, I shouldn't say next to, a lot of people don't do that. And so then they come in and ask us to clean it up on the back end.
Right. So then I'm taking from that your advice to business owners is get to you before the divorce happens and clean it up and create an operating agreement that plans as much as possible for that event or
Yes.
other catastrophic events.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is one of the things from a business planning perspective is what happens in the event that something goes wrong, whatever the something is, be it divorce, bankruptcy, because that may be something, maybe you're all guarantors on the debt.
Right.
that the company has taken out. Well, if you go file bankruptcy, what does that do to the rest of the business? So we try and cover those, and definitely divorce is one of those things that we put into play.
Yeah. And on the note of owning your business with your spouse after divorce, we've just wrapped up a situation like that.
We did.
And don't we wish that our client would have come to us ahead of time?
It would have been, I think it would have been a very different outcome if we
Very
had been
different.
involved from the get-go.
Yes. So that is the biggest takeaway, I think, from this video was come to your business lawyer ahead of time.
Yeah.
And when you're divorcing and you have a business, utilize lawyers. I think that's the other pitfall is that one of the parties did not have a lawyer in negotiating that divorce and signed a separation agreement that was not advantageous as it related to that.
Terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, it was,
Yeah,
it was
maybe not
just,
advantageous.
it was bad.
Yeah.
He was just, whatever. He made the deal, but.
And it's binding. And, I know you've had this. I've had plenty of people, this client included, who have some serious buyer's remorse after signing a separation agreement. And oftentimes it is too bad, and I cannot get them out of that. He got lucky that we had some very creative, strategic moves that we were able to make to undo what he did, but that does not always happen.
No. In fact, if it had not worked, he was facing probably a couple years of ugly litigation because that would have been the only way to fix it. If we had not been able to get it worked out, it would have been ugly.
Very ugly.
For both the business and so it's hard to, if you're in a business with your spouse, it's hard to say what happens if the marriage goes sideways, but we want to keep the business.
Right.
Nobody wants to think that's going to happen. So it's hard. I do understand that being hard to plan.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest issue there was even once the separation occurred, that client never reached out to anybody, divorce lawyer or business lawyer, to say, hey, how's this going to affect me?
Right.
You just struck a deal and
then paid for it later. And we never want that to happen. And we do have things we could do ahead of time, especially you with your clients, to alleviate those potential pitfalls.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so back to the business valuation piece. The other thing that comes up for me a lot in my cases is the income derived from the business and how the business owner may have been utilizing the income from the business for personal expenses or, ferreting it off elsewhere. And then the other spouse either doesn't have access to, doesn't understand what's there, purposefully or not. And that's something that I use a forensic accountant to dig in as well.
Yeah, because it's going to be hard looking at a balance sheet or even a ledger of every transaction and saying this was on itself or by itself an improper transaction.
Right.
How do you? And then the question is, what does that do to the business? It's probably driving down the value because it's being written off as a business expense. So there's that income is not flowing through, but the family benefited because, I don't know, cell phone bills and car payments and insurance and whatever is flowing through the business. Those are all going to be expenses after the fact.
Right.
That somehow still need to be paid.
Right.
And then again, I keep jumping back with the non-divorcing partner. If you have another partner in the business, what's that part? Like, wait a minute, just because you're going through this, I don't want my deal to be messed up.
Right.
So how do we do that in a way that, okay, well, we're going to stop paying for cell phone bills and car payments and insurance or whatever?
That doesn't make your partners happy.
No, they're not going to like that at all if that's part of the package.
Right.
And so, that's probably going to have to be solved on the family side. That's, I don't think that, especially if there's another partner involved, that they're going to want to change up the deal.
And does the operating agreement, provide for that or talk about, can you provide for what happens in divorce for expenses that are being paid for?
We've never put that specific, like that granular specifics of if somebody gets divorced, here's what we'll continue, because we typically don't say we're going to pay for X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
It's just, what do the members or the manager approve?
Uh-huh.
And so you kind of have to figure that out, because you don't want to say, we're only going to pay for these 5 things, and then a sixth expense comes up. Everybody wants to pay for it, but nobody wants to redo the operating agreement to do so. So we say, if y'all approve it, then it's fine. And so that's why I say it probably would need to be worked out on the family side, and back into the number of, here's what all of you, maybe you only got $100,000 in either profits or a salary from the business, but you really got an extra 50 or something in benefits.
Correct. And that plays into support. And that's something that oftentimes, like if I have really either spouse, the business owning spouse or the non-business owning spouse, I got to figure that out. I have to know exactly what my client received or what my opposing party received out of the business as payment for expenses, like you mentioned, the cell phone bill, the car, payment, the health insurance or whatever, because that is income. And then I utilize that. And sometimes that can be hidden and shady. Or I have, the client that's like, yeah, my flights to Costa Rica were business expenses because I run Airbnbs and I was checking out various properties while I was on my family vacation, that kind of thing. So we deal with that a lot.
Yeah. And from the business side, it's all good unless either a divorce happens or the IRS comes knocking. That's right. And then, you know what, I've got a phone number for you to use if that's the case.
We need a tax attorney. Let us know. We don't do that here, but we got some people.
We can bring some people in.
Yes.
But yeah, so what are the expenses? How are they going to continue to be handled? And what happens if nobody wants to continue running the business? So it's just the business owning spouse. There is no partner. And then the non-business spouse. And what if the business spouse says, you know what, I'm done. I don't want to do that anymore. But the only way that business was making money was because the business
person was working.
spouse. Yes.
Yeah.
And so then what do you do? What happens in that situation? Because then there won't be income coming in if that person's not willing to do it anymore.
Gosh, I could go off on so many tangents. That's like 5 different podcast videos of imputing income and purposeful underemployment or unemployment, post date of separation, diminishing of an asset can be like a divisible issue, divisible.
So there's ways that the courts deal with trying to say, I'm just not going to do it anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what you have been doing during the marriage. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes
running
sense.
the business into the ground usually isn't well received in a family law courtroom.
It would be a special person who says, I'd rather run the business into the ground than buy you out or give you half of it or whatever the case may be.
Yes.
You're probably going to.
Yes. And yet I see things like that, not infrequently, just because of the high conflict nature of my job and the cases that come to me. So it's sad, but it's true.
I guess it shouldn't be surprising.
Yes, no, definitely not.
So what about the non-business spouse wanting to get in? What do you advise the non-business spouse who wants to get into the business and doesn't want to give up ownership, doesn't want to be bought out and says, I can do it just as well?
Typically I advise them against that because I think the clean break is the better move. Most of the time, spouses are separating for a reason. And I think 95% of my cases, maybe more, honestly, I just hesitate to go all the way to 100, are people that should not maintain any type of connection beyond their children. And even that is difficult. Of course that is difficult, and so assume they have children. The idea of keeping connection with that person to co-parent is hard enough. Don't also keep connection with that person to be a business partner. So I generally do not advise the non-business owning spouse to try to get in and stay in. It's happened on a couple of occasions, but it's rare.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that's the same as sometimes I'll have what I call a business divorce where the partners can't work together anymore. One of the partners needs out, or maybe there's 3 or 4 and one needs to go. And some of them have come to me with an idea of, well, we can make it work. We just need rules in place. I'm like, you're in my office for a reason.
Right.
So same situation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Makes sense. What about the business owner who the business is their identity? And it's only going to succeed with them. They're the only way that it has made money and only way it's going to continue making money. And then they want to put a major premium on the value of that when it comes to your side of the discussion. How does that go?
So our forensic accountants do a great job of kind of tying in that like key man piece
Okay.
and assigning value to there being a key man in the company, if in fact there is. But I wouldn't rely on the person who thinks they're the key man to actually know that and put a value on that. I would certainly utilize my hired expert to identify that or not.
Do you use that as leverage because you know that that person doesn't want to let go of the business and they'll sacrifice elsewhere in order to keep
Oh,
it?
yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Yes. If I know the motivations of my opposing party in any situation, but certainly in this situation, I'm using it and I'm getting what I want for my client or what my client wants or more to based on, what the opposing party's motivations are there.
Do you find it hard for the spouse who supported all of that? Like was not the face, was not directly involved, but does that spouse have a difficulty letting go of the business?
Yeah, sometimes. That's a really good question. I think yes, because there's some of their identity wrapped up in that as well. I helped run this. I helped ensure that he or she was out the door at 8 a.m. and I did all of the stuff for our kids in the morning. And, that idea. And then to think, I think that one of the harder pieces too is, okay, I'm going to get X dollars out of this, but he or she is going to continue on and continue building and growing and receiving from that business. And so typically in that situation, if that's the case, and maybe that person really is the key man, then I'm trying to argue for more than 50% of the estate to account for the fact that that person does have continued earning capacity and estate building capacity.
That makes sense because I guess if you've got an asset that's going to continue generating cash,
Right.
that's a lot better than just a pot of cash that's sure
Right.
you can invest it and you can do whatever, but that is going to continue generating money
Yeah.
indefinitely.
And, I am getting at that in income, if I have the like dependent spouse, but it's also generating continued value in that business. And so I'm valuing, in a divorce, we're valuing an asset as of date of separation and date of division. But then after that, it's whoever keeps it. And it's kind of the same idea with a house. A house, especially in Charlotte, it increases in value every day. And
Right.
so you value it as of this day and you divide it as of this day. And then the next day or a year later, it's worth $100,000 more.
Right.
And that's a hard, pill to swallow sometimes for people. So it's the same idea with a business.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about trying to use either a prenup or a postnup to deal with the business? So if a business owner came to me and said, I'm getting married, I have this business that I have been running for years. What do I do? My first thing would be walk down the hall and talk to Jen.
Yeah.
Because you need a prenup.
Yep.
And then we also need to, what are you going to do with the ownership from an operating agreement and how are you going to handle it there? Is that what you would advise too? That would be my thought, but
absolutely. I have done many a prenup for people who have businesses prior to marriage and tend to continue to work those businesses. And there are so many options for how we handle that. And it's really just based on what the parties want. Oftentimes in a prenup situation, it's a little difficult because you're treading lightly. You're not like, I love you and I want to marry you, but also I want to keep every dime of this to myself and not allow you to touch it if we get separated. That would be, if I'm representing the business owner, what I would want to have happen. And I can create that in a prenup. But are the parties able to, sign on the dotted line when it says, yeah, I started this, I'm going to keep at it. And if we divorce, you don't get a dime from it.
right.
That's a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah. So I'm supposed to give up anything that I supported you during that period
Right.
just because I signed a piece of paper 15 years ago.
Exactly. So kind of the more, so that's an extreme, and I've done that, and great for the business owner who can slide that one in. Something that's a little bit more tempered though is how we would address the value of the business, the division of the business, all of those things. So instead of determining at the outset how it's going to be divided, it's more determining the method by which everyone is going to
Oh,
go
okay.
about valuing and dividing. And
Same thing that we do in an operating agreement.
exactly.
If the partners have to go their separate ways or need to buy one or the other out, this is how we're going to value the business.
Correct.
Okay.
And so that way you've eliminated, I've talked about that expensive forensic accountant.
Mhm.
You eliminate that person,
Yeah.
or at least if we're utilizing that person, it's split. It's like, this is the only person that we're going to use, and you're going to each pay for it. And that value is the gospel.
And I
That
imagine
idea.
it's really just a math question at that point. It's
Exactly.
not figuring it's just plugging into the formula that you've already established.
Correct. Yep.
Yep.
So it just gives everybody some boundaries and guidelines and doesn't
Okay.
let it blow up
Mhm.
and become this expensive, long, drawn out
Yeah.
litigation.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like that. That
Mhm.
way it's not, and you're not putting a shadow on the marriage as you walk in the door, right? I
Exactly.
mean,
It's kind of a positive. It's
mhm.
like we're going into this marriage without ever thinking that it's going to divorce, but if it does, we want to do so with respect towards each other and make it less
Yeah.
adversarial if
Yeah.
possible.
And that's the phrase I use with my clients setting up their operating agreements is nobody thinks they ever need this, but we plan for the worst case scenario. And
Exactly.
what we're doing is letting you plan for it without saying it's coming.
Exactly.
That's all you're doing.
And treat each other the
Yeah.
way you want to be treated right now.
Right.
It might feel adversarial if that ever got there, but you've prepared when y'all were nice to each other,
That's a much better time to do the talking than
Yes.
when you're not on good terms anymore.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. What about jumping back to the business spouse, non-business spouse? Do they care when you're valuing a business? Does sweat equity and all of there's not a cash infusion, but one spouse has worked tirelessly to make it happen.
Yeah.
Even if they're not an owner, do they get credit for that?
Yeah. I think, oh, wait, if they're not an
If they're
owner.
not an owner, how does that happen? How does that play out?
So that is more of a distributional factor
Okay.
in the estate, less so playing into the value of the business,
Mhm.
but you're arguing that sweat equity, if you will, and a distributional factor that should sway the judge one way or the other in coming off of that 50% division.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So certainly something to be considered, but not in the value. Now, the sweat equity of the owner, of course, that's a part of the value.
Right. Right. Okay. How often do the parties agree on the value assigned to the business?
Never.
Oh, surprise, surprise.
Surprise. I have one right now. I got a value from the owner spouse, who is my opposing party, of $100,000. My forensic accountant has circled around, isn't quite done, but is circling around a $1.7 million value.
Just slight difference there. Slight difference.
So my client very much wants to resolve it, but we are $1.6 million apart.
Right.
So I think I'm going to trial.
That's a big bridge to build.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just had a chat with Deb about that bridge building. Let me try that again. And mediation, and maybe she could do it. But not many mediators, I think, can get us
that's a big number
to close that number. Yeah.
So does your opposing party in that case have a forensic accountant or a valuation expert as well?
And that is a great point to bring up. Is I obviously I'm not going to name names or anything of that nature,
Mhm.
but I think that there are some forensic accountants in town that are awesome and do the work that we talked about earlier of putting in the minutia of bank accounts and the entries and the credit card statements and all of that, and really diving in and doing that work in almost a neutral way. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, we're not going to take the books that were cooked by the guy. We're gonna create it and actually derive an accurate value.
Mhm.
And then there are some in town that you can hire to take the books that were cooked by the guy. And, and so in that situation, the $100,000 value is like based on, of course, this business owner does his own taxes. And, he's the back of the napkin crayon guy. And
Mhm.
so he didn't want to pay his forensic accountant 80 to $100,000 to do this extensive work to create what he should have been creating all along. And so
Right.
his accountant created a value based on very basic information that was provided by the business owner.
Okay.
Mine did not. And so therein lies the difference. And I usually win at trial
I
when
was
I
going
have
to say,
that.
my guess is if you walk into a judge and show a couple of notebooks of
Yeah.
documents that have supported this value, and then somebody walks in with a single piece of paper and
Correct.
says, here's what I think it is,
Yes.
I know how judges typically are going to react to
Yeah,
that.
I feel good about my
Yeah.
chances at trial.
Yeah.
Of course, it's expensive, and it's been difficult for my client to incur the expense of doing the work that this man should have done,
Yeah.
the business owner should have done for years, but I think it'll be well worth it in the end. So, I usually have that pep talk every couple of months for her.
Just keep at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Stay the course.
Yeah.
Um, do you see all areas of involvement from your non-business spouses that you represent? So like some are actively involved, some are nominally involved, some are completely uninvolved, maybe they have their own business job, whatever that's going on.
Yeah, I would say most of the time they're very uninvolved. That
Okay.
it's the division is the business owning spouse goes to work and does the thing, and then the non-business owning spouse probably has a job,
Mhm.
or maybe not, but like has other facets of life that he or she is involved in.
So your non-business spouse then is at a significant disadvantage from knowledge of what other than what money hits the bank account.
Correct.
They
Yeah,
they likely have no idea what's going on
that's
at the
right.
business other
Yes.
than says things are good, guess so.
Right. We're living a certain lifestyle,
Yeah.
there's money, and we're good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that is where typically I'm engaged in litigation and I'm engaged in the discovery process and getting all of that documentation and then giving it to my hired expert and
Yep.
making sure, we have an idea of what's there.
Have you ever run into, so I've had a couple of clients, the non-divorcing business partner come to me and say, I don't want any of my books seeing the light of day. I
Yeah.
don't care if they're in court. I don't care if there's a subpoena. I'm not turning anything over because I'm not turning it.
Yeah.
They know they've been running the family trips through the
Right.
business, whatever.
Yeah.
How do you get around that? Because I know
Well,
what I do.
okay. What do you do?
So
I'm
I'm
curious.
like, well, we're just going to file a motion to quash. We're going to object to the subpoena. We are going to put them in front of a judge and see what the judge says. Because the subpoenas that I get are always, I want 10 years of stuff and I
Yeah.
want everything that's ever been billed or paid or
Sure.
whatever for time immemorial. Like, that's just crazy. Maybe
Yeah.
I give you 3 years. We
Right.
can talk about it. But if you won't agree to a reasonable number, I'm going to let a judge tell me what I'm going to do.
Right.
What is it like on your side trying to get it?
Yeah, I mean, I am prepared for that response. I
Mhm.
thought you were going to tell me something that I didn't know, but
Oh,
I
no.
knew it.
Yeah. No. I mean,
Guess I've seen it all at
the
this
rules
point.
only let us do so much.
True. So, yes, I'm prepared for that. I try not to issue a subpoena for 10 years worth of stuff if I don't have to, because I know I'm going to get some kind of objection like
Yeah.
that. So I try to hedge the objections, do something initially that's reasonable, that still
Mhm.
gets me what I need. Um, and then sometimes you do have to have a judge force it
Yeah.
down the pipe. And that's okay.
Right.
So if I get a motion to quash, well, I'm filing a motion to compel and
Mhm.
we're setting that for hearing and I'm arguing to the judge why I need all of
Yeah.
this. Um, and in terms of like, okay, let's flip it. If I have the business owner in the divorce and he or she is like, I am not showing them anything, I say, tough nuts. Yes, you are.
You
But
have to,
you
right? I mean,
have
like, there's no way
to.
you can get around it.
There's case law that's very clear that you have no privacy in your bank records in a divorce like this. And so unfortunately you are going to produce everything or they're going to get it in some
Mhm.
form or fashion. And so we can do it the easy way or the hard way. And if you want me to do it the hard way, okay, way, but I'm telling you what the outcome is going to
Yeah.
be. But there are things that we can do to
Mhm.
minimize the exposure, like a protective order
Yep.
that allows for the information to be, kept such that it's not being disseminated outside of the
Yeah.
litigation. Or you can, if you are very scared of this and you don't want it in a courtroom and public and all of that, um, ensure that the exhibits are marked confidential and not
Right.
published anywhere,
Mhm.
or don't go to court at all, and instead we
Right.
arbitrate. And arbitration is, court, but not in a courtroom, in a private setting.
Yep.
And all of that evidence that's presented doesn't get published
Yeah.
anywhere. And the order that is eventually public is not so illuminating, I
Yeah, that
guess.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a client just completely cave to every demand that the other party had because they didn't want to share information or disclose stuff?
Yes. And I mean, the second you asked me that question, I popped into my head exactly who. I'm sure I've had more, but this person came to my mind, and it was actually custody demands and
Okay.
child support demands. And he had a business and was very unwilling to disclose any documentation from that business. And my opposing party and opposing counsel knew it. And so you asked me earlier, do you utilize the weaknesses of,
Mhm.
and that happened in this case. And we ended up mediating and resolving custody in a way that was very unfavorable towards my client. But he unfortunately placed the privacy of his business acts above his desires over custody. And
Okay.
I will say that was very difficult for me.
Mhm.
I'm a mom and obviously love being a mom. And sometimes we represent people with values and goals that
Right.
we don't share personally.
Right.
And that was one of those times.
I can imagine so. I mean,
Yeah.
that would be tough to let somebody pick the business finances over
Over.
kid.
Yes, it was
That's
difficult.
yeah.
Hmm.